Education varies everywhere you go. Schools choose countless ways to meet standards that are set by the government. One needs to meet these standards to graduate high school and become able to compete in today's modern society. Growing up in the United States a week, school was an important part of the community, not only for academics, but also because of sports teams and other extracurricular activities. In most Alaska villages, this is not the case. These remote villages found throughout Alaska are still living by and holding on to the cultures they have for hundreds of years, long before Europeans came in with an education. As the world gets smaller and smaller, these villages with limited resources and different values are not forgotten about when it comes to meeting these standards. Children in these villages grow up with the expectations their culture has placed, and also that of Western society. These natives of Alaska do not want to spend their whole lives in their home villages. Therefore, they must be prepared for both styles. The native children lack attendance at school as they hold an important place in their community, responsible for maintaining community roles that keep the villages strong in the long winters. These children are faced with two colliding cultures, and as a nation, we must support who they are, take the skills they have, and teach them how to be successful in whatever life path they choose. I had the pleasure of interviewing two teachers who have taught in remote villages in Alaska. Tomas is from Alaska and is half Mexican and half of European descent. He taught in the village of Cordova for 4 years, from 2003 through 2007. Jody is from New Hampshire and of European descent. She taught in the village of Atmaluk from 2005 through 2007. Cordova is not a fully native village and has many people coming in and out in the summer due to fishing and oil vessels. The people of this town have more exposure to different cultures and ways of life, along with more access to materials and experiences outside of Cordova. Though remote, this town has a larger population than most villages. The high school students have opportunities to travel to other places in Alaska for sports and academic competition. This town has more diversity than many in Alaska, along with more political structure. However, it is important to point out that the native children of Cordova are facing many of the same issues we see in very remote villages of only a couple hundred people. On the western side of the state, 20 miles outside of Bethel, Jody taught in a fully native village of less than 300 people. Lipka and McCarthy discussed the history of educating the natives through European expectations. For generations, in most Native American cultures around our country, white people have educated these natives. However, they did so by encouraging them to follow their new ways and forget about where they came from. Slowly, these cultures have faded and their languages are dying. Children were separated from their families and parents had little, if any, involvement in school. This did not set the stage for establishing education-based routines, nor for a mentality that education is important and necessary. And because of this, one of the greatest problems teachers in Alaska see is a poor attendance rate. Because education is not a focus in the culture, it is often not enforced. If children are not taught at an early age that education is important, they will never take it seriously. How do we get families and children to change this mentality of school? How do we make school an encouraging, helpful, positive place? Engelbrett describes the philosophy that schools must have. When a native child's social identity is not validated through educational practices, the child may doubt his or her ability to perform in school, which may then put this child at risk for difficulty in language and literacy learning. Therefore, if we want to see active involvement in education, we must bring in what they know, their cultural values, and put them into the curriculum. I asked Tomas and Jody where their curriculums came from and if they felt the natives' culture was represented within it. Tomas said in Cordova they use a mainstream curriculum, and though outdated, he felt it was pretty accurate to meeting standards. There was little to no culture incorporated into the school day. However, the community provided a great number of summer camps and after-school classes should children choose to take them. Jody said her curriculum was decided by the district and provided online. There was no culture within the daily tasks. However, once a year, there were 2-week intensives where community members would come in and teach the children skills of the culture. So why is there so little culture within the curriculum in these places? And why is it that these teachers from other places come in with very limited knowledge on these traditions? Lipka gives a great example of how little a connection there can be between those on a local school board and their understanding of the importance of bringing their own culture into schools. At a bilingual conference in Anchorage, 2 Yupik school board members left when certain skills were discussed as a way to develop a science unit. Lipka says, the board members did not see the relevance of using Yupik culture and language in the process of schooling. He continues to explain if we want schools to be important and useful to a community, we must build on what they know and value, then reflect it in the curriculum. So how do we do this? We build on what they know. We incorporate the community and the skills the children need to have outside of school. For example, take math and science out to fishing camps. Incorporate more dance and music in the classrooms. Have students complete art that they see their elders do at the kitchen table. Have them write about the oral legends they've heard all their lives. We must make them proud in all aspects of their lives. When I asked Tomas and Jody what their students were proud of, they said they were proud of sports teams and material items like snow machines. They especially said they were proud of their culture. They did not say they were proud of their school grades. It's important to bring their culture into school so they can feel proud. Another contributing factor to low attendance is substance abuse. It is a well-known fact in all small towns, children are often faced with boredom, or they start to drink because their friends are trying it. Experimenting is part of growing, but with Native Alaskans, it often becomes a bigger part of the picture. Children are exposed to intoxicated people at a very young age. In Jody's experience, her students were often supposed to take care of those who had overindulged. Jody shared some of her sad stories where students who were 9 years old had to miss school to stay home and take care of siblings because their parent was gone binge drinking and had not been home for days. When I asked if any of her students, in fact, some of her 8th grade students had already been to a nearby Bethel treatment facility for using inhalants. She said she had to be careful what she kept in her house because one time one of her students informed her he liked to inhale cooking spray. After answering some of these same questions about Cordova, Tomas had similar stories. Most students saw a great deal of drugs and alcohol in their home. He knew some children who were already. This is another reason we must get students and families connected to schools. Hens and Davis discussed the difficulty these natives of Alaska have when trying to blend in the Western world and that of their traditions. They say, it is a search for an identity that is in balance and harmony with the world around and within, developing how natives who remain sober are often able to maintain this wellness. When people don't feel this control and it becomes too much pressure, they often resort to substance abuse. So what can be done to help children get through these growing years substance-free? How do we keep them in harmony with themselves and at the same time the various worlds around them? The importance of family is a strong point in Hansel's article. People who keep in closer contact with Native friends and family and who keep engaged in traditional activities have a better chance of staying sober. This is true for everyone. If you are passionate about other things and keep busy, not only do you have the time to drink, you do not feel the need to. Hawkins stresses this problem must be faced at an early level. We must put efforts into prevention rather than treatment. This must become part of the curriculum. Schools should also be equipped with peer-led interventions, as we all know that children are more likely to listen to their peers than adults. We must set up more programs to get students active and passionate. A great example of this is the Canoe Journey. Students become part of a canoe family, and throughout the year they do many different fun things. This program has a zero tolerance level for drugs or alcohol. Students who are caught with these will no longer be welcome to participate. This gives students them busy. It also makes them choose what is most important to them and helps them to rule out substances as an option. So the big question, I asked Tomas and Jody, were your students ready for Western society when they finished school? Tomas replied with, most of them, I think. Jody instantly with, absolutely not. In fact, a majority of her students were already pregnant or dependent on substances. This response must be changed, and for that to happen, we must make some great changes in rural Alaska. We must change the role and the view of schools in these villages to be a more dominant part of the community. The schools must join with the heritage, embrace the knowledge of the culture, and apply it to the government-issued standards. If the community embraces the school, children will do the same and attendance rates will increase. When children come to school, they have the ability to become empowered, not only academically, but they can be taught about substance abuse at an early age. They can find their place in the community and at the same time be prepared for others. Every student deserves the same opportunity. Thank you for listening to my final presentation.